For Grandma Margaret, I have just gotten home from the longest of long 12 hours that somehow turned into 16 hours because of staffing issues, nursing shifts. I am exhausted mentally and physically, and I feel filthy with sweat, tears, and many other things I should not be covered in. All I want to do right now is chop something into oblivion until I feel somewhat normal again. I want to not have to think for just a little while. When I unlock my apartment door, I am surprised to find Grandma Margaret sitting at the kitchen table, smiling, as always. After a shower and a change of clothes, I realizes that exactly what I need to do is make Noefla soup for myself and Grandma. What is Noefla soup, you may ask? It is a German dumpling soup that you'll be hard-pressed to find in any diner outside of the Midwest. Those who eat it are picky about how it is made, and no two people make it exactly the same. Not only that, but it is a recipe that is impossible to make exactly the same every time that you make it. Grandma Mary taught me how to make it as a small girl, long before junior high and shortly after I learned to read. It has always been our favorite meal to share. Starting with the vegetables, I carefully peels the potatoes, making sure that I cut off the skin, and only a small amount of potato. No conversation passes between the two of us. Grandma always knows when I needed a mental break at the end of the day and how most times I can't talk about what went so horribly wrong due to patient privacy. She never pushes me to talk about it. Instead, she sits at the table and watches as I goes through the motions of preparing our dish. A pound or so of potatoes later, I'm never too careful about the amounts that go into making Noefla soup, or the recipe. Noefla soup is not a dish of measurement, it is a dish of feelings. The amounts that go into it depend on what you're hungry for at the moment, what looks right, or what feels right. No recipe has ever been put on paper, just passed on from one generation to the next with wise words of, "Whenever it looks like enough, dear." Grandma always said that it was not a recipe meant to be shrunk or modified. It always makes a large amount, and any attempt at shrinking has been unsuccessful, although making it larger comes out perfectly every time. This works well when you are from the Midwest and are a firm believer in freezing the extra for a day when you don't want to make it from scratch. I chop the celery, carrots, and onions quickly as Margaret looks on from the table, nodding her approval occasionally. Once all of the vegetables are cooking in a lot of butter, yes, it's bad for you, but most comfort foods are, it's time to make the Noefla dough. My favorite part of making this meal, and also the most comforting. Eggs, flour, and a tiny bit of chicken broth get mixed together until everything is mixed together. The secret is to use only a certain amount of flour and add more chicken broth until it is right. Doing the reverse, adding set amounts of all three ingredients and adding more flour tends to make the dough taste just like you would think it would. Flour. Some people prefer chicken noodle soup, others like macaroni and cheese after long days. For me it is Noefla soup. Creating the dough is one of the most relaxing things I could think to do after a long day, and Grandma watches carefully as I knead the dough and rolls it into snakes. Only every once in a while does she gestures to add just a little more chicken broth. Dropping bits of dough into boiling chicken broth puts me into a trance. As I place the lid on the pot to boil for several minutes, my mind slips into the past. The bad melts away quickly, and memories of standing on a stool wearing Grandma's second-best apron make their way to the front of my mind. I remember the hem of the apron dragging on the floor at first, being so little I could barely see over the counter. Then I remember the awkward middle school years and unloading my boy and friend troubles over a bowl of Noefla dough. Lastly, I remember becoming an adult, and trying hard to make time in my busy life for Grandma's house at least once a week. Though, once work, friends, significant others, and my own children came into the picture, it seems that almost 2 would go by before I found myself back in her kitchen again. As I put the finishing touches on the soup and turn off the burner, the memories fade and I am back in my own apartment once again. Grandma says nothing, but she has always made my day better, just by being there. I dish a single bowl of soup, butter a piece of bread, because nothing goes with Noefla soup the way a buttered piece of bread does, and sit down at the table. Grandma Mary has been gone for 11 years now, and on the hardest days, after the worst shifts, I always miss her the most. The regrets become an inner monologue, before being spoken out loud. Did I spend enough time with her?
Man plants. God laughs, walking into the studio, unwrapping the scarf he'd gotten himself for Christmas last week. He asked, out of deeply ingrained habit now, "How many cups have you finished today?" He did not walk over to look in the exhibit space. He did not look at the shelving holding cups just out of the kiln. He did not look at the glazing table for cups with glaze drying. Really, if there were any not yet in the kiln, there was going to be trouble. All those things were verboten. He was permitted to ask, "How many cups did you make today?" The other acts produced too much stress. To be honest, it took several months before the stress of the challenge set in. The early months were spent exploring form and function and telling herself that she was honing the skills needed to produce an art, real art, in the quantity required. And then emotion kicked in. And kicked in hard. Late in 2020, she'd accepted a grant, fashioned somewhat along the lines of great art projects the world over and through time immemorial. Not to make one piece, not to make one arrangement, but to make a monumental piece of art that would speak volumes. Think of the installation of thousands of ceramic poppies in London Tower. Think of the terracotta warriors. So many individual items. One message. But, for this, it had to be started and finished in 1 year. Studio door opened on January 1, 2021 and closed on December 31, 2021. Exhibit space had been created and provided adjacent to the studio. Installation was an ongoing part of the project. She'd put the application in for the grant on a whim. She hadn't even mentioned it to him. Moving to Seattle for the year was definitely not part of their plan for 2021. But, then again, 2020 had shown us all that any expectation that plans will hold is fool's gold. Plan all you want. Then, when life happens, figure out what you're going to have to do instead. Planning may help you bounce back from things like COVID or transforming your small business into an online business overnight or winning a grant that upends life. But very few plans actually come to fruition. At least not recently, so 2020 was a gem. 2021 has been a different kind of gem, he thought, looking at the screen of his phone with the countdown clock showing only hours left in 2021. These countdown clocks were popular for the train wreck that was 2020. Most of the world isn't using one for 2021. He is. It's been another hell a year. At least the vaccines took hold and society started to rebound. Turned out not to matter for her. She spent all the time in her studio mostly alone anyway. He took care of the business, himself, the houseplants, and feeding her. And not causing her stress. He was in charge of that too. She was in charge of finishing 6 pots today. That's all she had left to complete and place in the installation. Should be manageable. But she had been working such long hours for so many of these last weeks that anything was possible. He was walking on thin ice here, nonetheless. After 364 days of the freaking grant project, he asked the only question he is allowed to ask. The answer came. Quietly. Meekly. 4. So far. What time is it? 4. So far, so I have 8 hours, a little less. Yes, silence. He knew to follow with silence. And the cup of tea. In a cardboard cup. No ceramic mug for her. Seems odd given how much she loves everything made of clay and how many cups she's made this year. Somehow the cardboard cup of tea ties her back to the rest of the free world that can't survive without disposable cups of caffeine in one form or another. She starts talking. These last 6. They feel hard. They're the young. I couldn't face them earlier. But I'm finding it really hard to face them now. Maybe it's better, I have no choice now. I have to face them and finish them. Should be done with these last two in about an hour or so. I'll definitely make it. 3,652 cups. 1 cup for every person reported to have died from COVID on December 31, 2020. This was a visual marker of the loss we suffered. The number went higher in that awful winter FO 2021. But the project started January 1, 2021. So the marker was laid down with the December 31st number, and to show balance and honor, each cup has a place and an age. In March, there was an article about the project. Once that got around, family and friends of people who died on that date started to send her information about their loved one. Many included info about the caregivers, nurses, doctors, aides, family members. The wait was almost unbearable. April was hard. Music helped. Lots of classical music to fill the studio and keep her mind stringing along to the notes. And each cup is unique. As unique as each person. Each cup is a variation. Each cup contains a number and a place. There are too many cups. She will finish. And then she will rest. Until January 1st at noon, when the exhibit space will be open to the public. They've been selling.